Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here to announce my next video series on the channel. It's going to be a series where I go back through a book series that I read when I was younger to see how it holds up now in 2020, like 15 years after basically it was released. So I gave you guys two options in a community post that I put up a few days ago. It was either between Deltora Quest, that series, or the Saga of Darren Shan. And you guys voted, and it was 60-40 in favor of the Saga of Darren Shan. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be doing a review series, starting off with the first book in the Saga of Darren Shan, or the Cirque du Freak series, which is called Cirque du Freak or A Living Nightmare. We'll be starting off with this and going all the way up to book 12, which of course is Sons of Destiny. So, yeah, this is just going to be a sort of like preview video for the series, and then, like I said, we'll start on Saturday and it will be weekly on Saturday. I think that was the best schedule to have, because I like to do my kind of series like this that are kind of long. I like to keep the schedule fairly sort of brisk and get through it relatively quickly, just to show that I'm going to get through the whole series. And yes, it is reading a book every week, but like most of them are under 200 pages. I think volume 10 is the longest one, and it's only just a little bit over 200 pages. So it's also, you know, there's not too many words on each page, so we'll get through it pretty quickly. So if you want to follow along, I think it's an okay series to like read like one a week. The plan for the videos is that, you know, of course, they're going to be full review discussion videos. So it's not just going to be a really kind of brief, you know, like, oh yeah, it did hold up. No, we're going to go in depth on the characters, the plot, world building, stuff like that, like I usually do when I review other stuff on my channel. So expect kind of long-ish videos, but I'm not going to make them super long. As for spoilers and how I'm going to tackle that, because obviously I've read the series before, and I do remember a lot of the core plot points, even though I haven't read it in quite a while. The way I'm going to do it is that, of course, like when I review Volume 1, I'm going to full spoilers on the whole of Volume 1. And I might address some stuff that Volume 1 sets up that, like, oh, maybe the later books cover. But instead of like saying what they are, I am just going to be like, yeah, I think this gets like touched on or resolved in the later books, or I don't think this gets touched on in the later books. I'll be more sort of alluding to other stuff rather than doing full spoilers. So even if it's potentially like your first time going through the series, sort of like with my read through, you don't have to be particularly worried about spoilers for the later books. I'm not going to jump in with this and note any connections that the first book has to the 12th book. That connection I'll wait to make it until we get to like the 12th book. So that's the basic kind of way it's going to be. Like I said, once a week, every Saturday, and full spoiler in-depth review of these books. So I suppose the final thing before we end the video to really get through with this is to just kind of cover my kind of history with this series, just so I'm not wasting a ton of time in the review for the first book covering this. I'll just do it all now. So I would definitely say that the Saga of Darren Shan it's probably the first like full series of books that I actually read. Like, I'd read books before, but I don't think any of them were necessarily part of a series. I think like I'd read like the first like 2 Harry Potter books, I think, at the time or something like that, but I wasn't like super into them. So I think there's like a book fair in school at one point, and this was sort of one of the more kind of heavily promoted ones, and so I picked it up, really liked it. And I think at the time when I got into these books, I believe the first like 8 or 9 books was out. Like I think the 9th book might have like just been released at the time, or something like that. Again, I don't remember the exact kind of specifics here, but what I do remember specifically is that I remember that waiting for book 10, 11, and 12, the last 3, I definitely was waiting for them to be released, because they are probably the first books where I sort of specifically remember buying them on like release date and like wondering like, when is the next book out? Like, how do book release dates work and stuff like that? Because obviously, like, first book came out in like 2000, the last book came out in 2004, and this was before like we had the internet here, so I had no real way to check it up, and like, but back then, like, you wonder like, yeah, how do you know when books are actually released? So you actually have to like ask in the bookshops and stuff like that. So, I definitely remember that was sort of an exciting time of just like waiting for a book to be released as part of this, 12 book series that I'm super into. I also specifically remember with the last book being really, really happy with how the series ended. And but at the same time, along with that, I'm like, oh, my favorite series of books is over. Like, what do I do now? So it was one of those interesting things of like, a satisfying ending. Like, stories at times can struggle to do the ending really well, but I remember really, really liking how this series specifically ends, but it being also like a sad time as well. I think like after this, he did the next series that he did, the Demonata series. I remember really liking that as well. So, if we continue and this series does pretty well on the channel, and we do Del Toro Quest, maybe I'll also do Demonata or the follow-up to this, or I suppose the prequel to this. He did stories about Larton, of course, to kind of set up kind of where we are here. So I also remember really liking them. So maybe we can get to them if this ends up being a relatively popular series. But I think what's interesting about this, looking back on it now, is that it's kind of like, obviously, like kind of, kids horror. Horror is not at all a genre that I particularly go for. So like outside of Darren Shan books, I don't really think I've read any other horror books outside of I think there was 2 Star Wars novels that came out that were basically horror themed. It was about like a disease and really bad stuff happening. I can't remember the names of it off. I think one of them was Death Troopers or something like that. And then there was like a follow up or a prequel to it. I don't remember exactly. But beyond that, the Darren Shan stuff is like some of the only horror books that I've ever read, and that I don't have a particular interest in like vampires, which obviously is what this series is about, or like demons, which is what the Demonata series is about, and so on. Because I remember when like his other more recent, it's done at this point, but the zombie series that he put out, I remember not being able to get into that one because like just zombies is just not a style of story that I particularly like at all. But I think the reason I kind of almost like, even though it's not really my style of why I got into this so well, is because he does the world building on his own style of vampires really well. That's I think the main thing I remember about how vampires are done in this book. It's not the super, dramatic, over the top, Dracula style of vampires. It feels like a much more modern attempt at them. And we're talking about modern as in back in 2000, basically, when this first started. So that's going to be fun to see how it all like holds up as we go back through it and so on. Obviously, there was a movie made, I think, which did it cover the first 2 books or 3? Either way, it was called like Cirque du Freak or whatever. No, wait, they called it The Vampire's Assistant, actually, didn't they? I only saw it once. I remember thinking it was like all right as an adaptation, but definitely nowhere near the books level. And I think most people saw it that way. I don't know if it was quite the Last Airbender like panned so heavily, but I don't remember it being particularly well received, given that the source material is quite popular. And that was okay. I think that's what really helped them, maybe get the series, and have it become a little bit more popular in America as well. Because, of course, like, he's an Irish author, so, I'm Irish as well. So, there was that kind of connection as well, I suppose, kind of. So, yeah, I rooted out all my copies of the books. And as you can see here, I have, like, the full sort of same edition, like, all the same type of covers, which are these, primarily black covers with just a sort of relatively kind of simple, more vague style, graphic on the front, not really telling you or visually showing you too much or anything like characters. It's just sort of like symbols, basically, in a way of what's going on. So I've always liked these covers because I've seen some of the more recent covers, and they're nice in their own way, but I also really like that the kind of almost original covers fit the tone of the series actually quite well. So yeah, we'll just quickly show these off. You can see some of them are a little bit faded, of course, because I've just had them sort of hanging around my room for like so long. There we go. There's volume 10. Here's volume 11. You can see it still has the sticker. €6. That was a quite good value actually back in the day. And yeah, Sons of Destiny. There we go. Last book. And yeah, I'm really excited to get into it. I suppose real quickly for anyone who is unfamiliar with this but maybe wants to follow along, I'll just read out the sort of blurb on the back of the first volume here, just as a bit of a setup, because this is like the preview before we go into book 1. So yeah, the Saga of Darren Shan, book 1, Cirque du Freak. Darren Shan is just an ordinary schoolboy until he gets an invitation to visit Cirque du Freak, until he meets Madame Octa, until he comes face to face with a creature of the night. Soon Darren and his friend Steve are caught in a deadly trap. Darren must make a bargain with the one person who can save Steve, but that person is not human and only deals in blood. Cirque du Freak. So yeah, really, really interesting kind of setup here. Again, like I haven't read it in a while, but like it's gonna be interesting to go back to this one specifically, because just the way it's sort of laid out as like a setup for the rest of the series, the opening of all of this, with the introduction of Cirque du Freak itself, Darren, Steve being a focus, and I suppose the show itself at Cirque du Freak being most of what this book is about, and then the ending of the book more being where the vampire stuff really heavily comes into play. Because other than that, like you saw from the titles of like the rest of it, it's kind of done in trilogies in a way. Like the first 3 books are like your sort of intro. The second 3 books are like your really heavily exploring the vampires. The third group of 3 books is definitely where the story starts to expand and sort of, I suppose, begin to build towards the finale. It's when there's a little bit of passage of time and sort of the transitionary arc as the main plot, you could say, comes into play, and then the last 3 is like the conclusion. So because I think they released the books in that way at one point. They released sort of like bigger books, which are like 3-in-1s, so to make it just like 4 bigger books rather than 12 small books. But the way we're doing this is I'm reviewing each one individually. So we'll do Cirque du Freak, then we'll do The Vampire's Assistant, then Tunnels of Blood, and so on. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I need to say in the build-up to this. I guess in the comments, just let me know what your thoughts are going into this series. Like, have you read this series before? Have you heard about this series before? Have you seen the movie? And then what are your thoughts on other stuff, like if I was to continue this series and maybe do Del Toro Quest or some other series of books? Just let me know your thoughts on that. But yeah, like I said, we'll be reviewing Cirque du Freak on Saturday. But before that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.